The naysayers are the majority of the American public. It's the American people who are the naysayers. Oppose new tariffs on other countries. All goods. Look at this. 56% of Americans oppose new tariffs on all goods. How about cars in particular? 56% of Americans oppose new tariffs on imported cars and car parts. Look, the bottom line is the American people oppose. No, no, no. They do not want new tariffs. I looked at a ton of polling. It's really hard to find any in which you find folks supporting new tariffs, maybe against China, but against all other countries, especially our allies. No, no, no. Oppose.
So Caroline Levitt again told Kate in that discussion that the president is laser focused on reducing prices. What do voters say that they believe the tariffs will do to prices?
What do voters believe the tariffs will do to prices? At least in the short term, tariffs will raise prices. Again, what do we get here? 72% of Americans overall say that the prices will go up in the short term. How about among Republicans, the Republican base? This was a shocker to me. 64% of Republicans believe that tariffs will in fact cause prices to go up in the near term. And get this, just 5% of Americans overall believe that tariffs, at least in the short term, will bring down prices. You don't have to be a mathematical genius to know, Mr. Berman, that 72 beats 5.
So this is a huge move, and it's a huge restructuring of the global economic order, whether you like it or not. Do Americans feel like there should be, or where does this reordering of the global economic order rank for them?
Look at this. Should be a high priority for Trump. Number one, the economy at 82. Number two, inflation, 80. Look at this. Tariffs. 8 out of 8 on the list in terms of things that should be a high priority for Donald Trump at just 30%, 50 points less than inflation. Americans want simply put nothing to do with it, yet Trump decides to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. Right or wrong, I think it is safe to say this is a huge political risk he is taking.
100%. This could be a risk that ends up ending his presidency, in my mind.
And we do have breaking news. A look at the markets just minutes after the opening bell this morning as Wall Street reacts to President Trump's new tariffs. You can see the giant red arrow pointing down. Joining us now, NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans and NBC News senior business analyst and host, of course, of the 11th Hour, Stephanie Ruhle. Lauren Leader back with us as well. Steph, let's just get your blink reaction here to the markets. S&P 500 down 3%. My phone full of push alerts with dire news in terms of reactions to President Trump's new tariffs.
And I'll tell you, my phone in the last 24 hours, I've been speaking to former Trump administration officials from his first term, CEOs of consumer products companies, Wall Street investors and economists. And people are sort of blown away on the negative, because what's really lost here, Jonathan, is trust. We have the biggest, strongest economy. Even the math that they're using in this idea that having a trade deficit means all these other countries are ripping us off, that's not the case. There have been some bad trade deals over the years, without a doubt. But us having a trade deficit with other countries, no, we're the biggest, best economy. We buy more stuff. But when I say a loss of trust, just think about this. When you talk about trading, these are long-term partnerships and investments. We told all these manufacturers for years, stop doing business in China. They're our adversary. Go to Vietnam. Now look what we're doing to Vietnam. In Trump's first administration, it was Trump and Jared Kushner that renegotiated NAFTA to create the USMCA, right? A better NAFTA. Now they're tearing it up. We're losing trust with our global partners, and that's a huge problem. And the last thing I would say is this argument that we keep hearing from the White House, short-term pain for long-term gain and all these jobs that are going to be roaring back. Where? I have not seen one single CEO saying, I'm going to build a manufacturing plant here. Howard Lutnick has said the robots are going to start manufacturing the things. When and where? Because for a company to now say we're going to start manufacturing in the United States, it takes 3 to 5 years to build that plant. 3 to 5 years from now, Donald Trump is not going to be in office. Who knows if he'll retract on these tariffs? And in order for you to make any sort of investment, a long-term investment, you have to trust the information. You have to trust your counterparty. And my last point I would make is Donald Trump is not trusted in a business sense. And I take you back to his history. What is he great at? He's great at branding. He's great at marketing. He's a phenomenal politician. What he's not great at is business. As a business person, we all know this. He went bankrupt 6 times. The one business he tried to operate was a casino that he drove into the ground. And the reason he didn't do business with big U.S. banks is because they were unwilling to do business with him. I know this because I worked at Deutsche Bank, the bank that actually did do business with him. And what he's known for is not standing up to contracts, not standing up to deals that he agrees to. And now he's doing that on American soil with American trading policies. And this could put our country in grave risk when it comes to being the superpower that we are. And if you don't believe me, listen to what Rand Paul has to say, right? An elected official who knows what this will do politically and economically. And it's hugely dangerous.
So, Christine, in Trump's first term, the stock market acted as something of a tripwire.
Yeah.
That when it would fall below a certain level, he'd kind of back off things, change his rhetoric, whatever it might be, because he puts so much emphasis, some would say too much emphasis, on how the stock market's doing to sort of gauge the health of the economy. But it does not seem to be the case this time around.
He used the stock market as his own personal poll or a letter grade in school, and he really wore it as a badge. Even yesterday at the Rose Garden, he was talking about how great the stock market was under his first administration. We call that a stock market put, a Trump put, that maybe if things, to use an options term, that maybe if things go really sour, he would change his behavior this time. I don't think that's the case anymore. You've heard the White House officials talking about the 10-year note yield. That is the thing they're talking about. It's declining. That's lowering interest rates for consumers and businesses. That's a good thing. Well, it's declining because there's fear about his economic agenda and what it's going to do to the economy. So it's falling for a bad reason, not a good reason, but that's the number that they're starting to use now. So I don't think that they're looking at the stock market, at least so far, a 1,200 point, near the lows of the day, a 1,200 point decline, something that he would have said, if it were the Biden administration, he would have said this is impeachable, having a stock market fall like this. But they're not. This is not one of their metrics anymore.
And to the haphazard nature of these tariffs, some of these are on a number of countries that include several uninhabited islands. Okay. The Heard Island and the McDonald Islands, which are located in the sub-Antarctic Indian Ocean, made Trump's list. While teeming with seals, penguins, and other birds, these islands have no permanent human population.
For 40 years, we've had an economy that rewards people who ship American jobs overseas and raises taxes on American workers, and we're flipping that on its head. We're going to cut taxes for American workers and for American companies that build here. We're going to make it harder to ship American jobs overseas. It's a total shift in the way that we've done economic policy in the United States of America, but it was necessary.
That was Vice President J.D. Vance earlier this morning talking about why President Trump decided to impose all these tariffs on some of America's top trading partners. With us now is Texas Democratic Congressman Greg Casar. He sits on the Oversight and Education and Workforce Committees. He is also chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. It's always a pleasure to see you, Congressman. Thank you for being with us. On X, you posted, tariffs can be a good tool, like a scalpel is a good tool in surgery. What Donald Trump is doing is more like using a chainsaw for brain surgery. So what would be, Congressman, a scalpel in the world of tariffs?
Tariffs can be a good tool if you actually care about American workers. When foreign companies are dumping products in illegally at sub-market rates to try to destroy American companies and competitions, when they're dumping their products in and sometimes use not just low-cost labor, but sometimes slave labor, it makes sense to use tariffs and then support and subsidize the American worker and the American company to produce here at home. But what Donald Trump is doing is just a blanket set of tariffs on his tour, to just try to feel like he's the most powerful person in the world and be able to be on phone calls with foreign leaders and feel like a big man. But we know that he doesn't actually care about American workers, because at the same time that he's putting these tariffs into effect, he's trying to give billionaires and big CEOs in America and across the world an enormous tax break. So what folks at home need to know is that Donald Trump promised you he was going to work to support the American worker and that he was going to work to lower prices. And Donald Trump lied through his teeth. He's been doing nothing to lower prices, really what he's spending his time doing is trying to be buddies with billionaires, the CEOs of enormous companies, and leave American workers out to dry while jacking up prices for the everyday consumer.
So, Congressman, is your main opposition the motives behind these policies, or is it the fact that, for example, in the case of China, which is one of the countries that, to use your terms, I mean, clearly has in the past and in many industries been dumping into the United States with very little repercussions, right? Any negative repercussions. They have the way the human rights violations that China carries out within its own people and the Uyghurs. I mean, it's just mind-boggling how human rights are violated in China, and yet the products from China are welcome in the United States. So what is it? Is it a questioning of the motives behind the policy, or is it the flipping of the economic policy, the shift in economic policy that the vice president referred to it as?
Yeah, let me be clear here. There is a good way to impose tariffs. Just like President Biden said, for example, we are going to have tariffs on foreign steel while supporting the American steel industry. And you can do that in a smart and thoughtful way without putting tariffs on every single good, pushing them up to levels without really clear explanation about why you've even set it at that level, other than having Donald Trump's son go on the internet, threaten foreign leaders and say, come deal with my dad, or maybe with other members of my family who you can cut a check to or cut a deal with. And so the policy and the motives are all tangled up here together, is what I think is really clear. We need to know is he is doing something outrageous and reckless and blanket and across the world while saying that his motive, just like it's always been, is
disaster, an absolutely nightmare wake up for Donald today, because his plan is failing. His plan is failing everybody. I mean, in 2017, 2018, whatever you could say about Trump's plan, it wasn't as disastrous as this. And while his trickle-down economic plans certainly hurt the 99%, the 1% was very happy. The top 2-3% maybe was very happy with Donald Trump because they made a lot of money on the stock market. Taxes were cut. Regulations were cut. Way easier to exploit your workers. All of that. There was a constituency for Trump's inequality first term. This time it's very different. Donald is getting hammered by people over these tariffs, and it's because no one's benefiting. At least a vanishingly small number of people. Even some of his billionaire buddies are losing. They're like $50 billion poorer than they were a few months ago because of how much they've lost on the stock market. This is what's happening. Donald has united the entire world. I've talked about this. The entire planet against him. And that's not going away. This could end his presidency. If you were ever going to see Republicans turn on Trump and support impeachment or actually start doing their jobs in Congress at least, it's when he starts tanking even millionaires and billionaires.